To whom is worship to be given? I hope and pray that you'll stay tuned because today on The Logical Truth, we're going to be answering this question. So just stay right there. Hello, friends, and welcome to The Logical Truth. My name is Wes Garland, and I am the pulpit minister here for the Central Church of Christ here in Saraland, Alabama. And I'm just so very thankful to have you join me today as we evaluate this subject. Today we're asking the simple question, to whom is worship to be given? You know, it seems like that depending on where you are in the world and who you're actually talking to will depend on what God they are worshiping. Now, there are some individuals that worship people. There are some people that worship little graven images. There are individuals that worship these other gods of these other religions. But I want to ask you, to whom out of all this multiplicity of possible gods that are out here in this world, to whom is worship to be given? You know, before we actually get into this actual answering of this, I want us to first understand what I mean by worship. Worship is defined by Webster's dictionary to honor or show reverence for as a divine being or supernatural power, to regard with great or extravagant respect, honor, or devotion. Now, that's what we're talking about. It simply means paying homage to. We're willing to bow down to this individual. We're willing to bow ourselves down in a prostrate position, giving honor, glory, and praise to this one individual or one God. So whenever we are talking here about worship, we're saying, in other essence, whenever we're asking the question, to whom is worship to be given? To whom do we need to be bowing ourselves down to? Is God going to accept any God that is out here in this world? Is God going to accept us worshiping an individual? What about an angel? What about these little graven images? I mean, to whom are we going to be worshiping to? Now, with that being the case, I want us to answer it in this particular way. There are two main categories of worship that is given in Scripture. And we can see this all within one passage, and this is found right here in John chapter 4, verses 23 and 24, which simply says, "But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth." You know, this is an account where Jesus is talking to the woman at Jacob's well. And I think it's very interesting as he is talking to this woman, and he's having this little discussion with her. He also goes right in to this explanation right here in verse number 20. I think it actually starts around verse number 21, where she starts talking about worship. Well, he says, you worship what you don't even know, but we worship what we do know, because salvation is of the Jews. But in verse number 23, he says this, "But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth." Now, the Father is seeking such who are going to be true worshipers of Him. Now, with that being the case, I want you to also understand this. Whenever there is a statement such as true worshipers, that also brings with it an implication that there is also, on the other opposite side of that, what's the opposite of true? False. Well, if there is such a thing as a true worshiper, then there also must, by implication, be false worshipers as well. And so with Jesus making this statement right here, He is classifying that there are two possible categories of worship, and that is, there are those who are true and those who are false. But I want you to also emphasize this one point. There are different kinds of worship, though, that is found within Scripture. Now, we understand that, like if you were to go back to the Old Testament, we can easily look at how there was animal sacrifices, and there was also people who worshiped within the temple, being the Jews, and then in the tabernacle first, and then it went over to the temple. And then you have individuals who was worshiping on the Sabbath day, and then you have those in the New Testament who are worshiping on the first day of the week. And so, I mean, you've got those type of different worships that are being done. But what I really want to talk about are some of the categoristic kinds of worship that are mentioned within Scripture. Number one, we have what is known as idolatrous worship. Now, I know this is a command given right here in Leviticus chapter 26, verse 1, when God was talking to Moses, and he says that you shall not make idols for yourselves, neither a carved image, nor a sacred pillar shall you rear up for yourselves, nor shall you set up an engraved stone in your land to bow down to it, for I am the Lord your God. Now, I understand that this is a command, but you also have throughout the history of the Old Testament, and you find how the children of Israel actually did this idolatrous type worship. I mean, it even started right at the very beginning of the law of Moses. Do you remember back in Exodus chapter 20, whenever he was there on Mount Sinai getting the law of Moses? And I mean, it wasn't, while he was even on the mountain itself, they said, we don't know how much longer he's going to be up there. We don't even know if he's even alive. So why don't you just go ahead and make us a golden calf? You remember that? And the very next thing you see here is that Aaron asked for all the gold, and they put it in the fire, and they mold it into this calf. And the next thing you know, you have the individuals bowing down to it. This is idolatrous worship, where they make something, and this is even found over here in Romans chapter 1, which I don't have a slide for it, but if you want to go to Romans chapter 1, you can actually find there where he says that they started worshiping the creation rather than the Creator. They started making for themselves graven images and things like that, and they started worshiping the sun, moon, and stars. They started worshiping all these other things, and I think it's so sad that it actually shows that it doesn't necessarily have to be a little graven image for it to be an idol worship. It can actually be anything else that you put as first in your life. So you think about anything materialistic. You think about anything of that nature. This is exactly what we're talking about. Idolatrous worship. He says, you shall not make idols for yourselves. The carved images, the sacred pillar, an engraved stone to bow down to it. He says, for I am the Lord your God. Now, he makes that very, very clear in this passage, and it's very important for even us to understand that as well. But on top of the idolatrous worship, you also have what is known as vain worship. Now, friends, what you're actually going to find is this. In Matthew chapter 15 and verse number 9, he says, and in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. So this is actually a prophecy given over here by Isaiah, which is found in the Old Testament. And I think it's very interesting to note that he says that in vain they worship me, teaching his doctrines the commandments of men. Anytime that the commandments of men are being instructed, then friends, understand this point. It comes down to the fact that they are worshiping in vain. Now, what does this word vain actually mean? Vain means emptiness, without use, without purpose. It's something that God is never going to accept. You can put all the effort into it that you ever wanted to give, but the fact of the matter is, friends, God is not going to receive it because it is in vain. It's without purpose or existence. All right? So, that can also be done whenever we're talking here about anything that is man-made, or whether we're talking about church or teaching or whatever that nature, anything that is man-made, commanding from the commandments of men, leads to vain worship. At the same time, you also have right here in verse number 22 of John chapter 4, that same text with the woman at the well, you also have ignorant worship. And you see here that he says, you worship what you do not know. Now, with that being the case, is it possible for individuals to come into an assembly not knowing a bit about what they're doing? Is it possible for an individual to come into an assembly and they are saying they're worshiping, but they have no idea what they're even worshiping or why or how it's even properly done and all that. I mean, we have people do that all the time, right? They don't realize why the Lord's church actually does the Lord's Supper every first day of the week. They don't understand it, but you have people that come in and they want to partake of it. Ignorant worship. They don't know. And here's the thing. Whenever I say ignorant is not a bad word. It just simply means not knowing. Am I ignorant? I'm ignorant of a lot of things, okay, in this life. But here's the thing about it, though. Whenever we're talking about ignorant worship, it simply means that you don't know what you're doing whenever you're worshiping. You don't really know the reason why behind it. You don't know the purpose. You don't know anything of that nature. You're just simply worshiping what you do not know. And another example of this is found over here in Acts chapter 17, whenever Paul went to Athens. Watch what he says right here in verse number 22 to begin his whole entire lesson out to. He says, Then Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, Men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious. Now watch this. They are very religious individuals. He says, For as I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship, now watch this, I even found an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God. Therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you. See, these individuals in Athens, I mean, you think Athens, Greece, what are they known for? They're known for their Greek mythology, right? You're talking about Ares, you're talking about Athena, you're talking about Hades, you're talking about Zeus and Diana. And I mean, you've got all these Greek gods, right? But as he said, he's walking around, he's seeing all of these different statues that are up, and he says, I know that you're very religious individuals. But also notice one other thing. You have an altar to the unknown God, and that's the one I want to talk to you about today. They were worshiping not even knowing. They were ignorant worship. But at the same time, as what we see over here, the fourth way that people can worship is to be true worshiping. And we see this in John 4, verse 24. We've already read this passage. It says, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. Now in verse number 23, it says the true worshipers of God. And that's exactly what we're talking about even in this text right here. So out of idolatrous worship, which is actually against God's will, vain worship, which is against God's will, ignorant worship is exactly that. It's against God's will. The only one out of those four that are actually found to be good and true is the true worship. Now, let's ask this question now. To whom is worship to be given? I mean, you think like I said, there's so many individuals out here in the world that have their own gods. They bow down, they have their own religions and their groups, and there's some even individuals, and we're going to get to this whenever we talk here about idolatrous. You know, remember how I said there that it doesn't necessarily have to be a little graven image. Can the idol actually be ourselves? Sure. Can we ever put ourselves on the forefront of our minds that the only thing that we're going to be doing is thinking about ourselves and we're going to only do what is best for us? Sure. What about money? For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, is what 1 Timothy talks about. Can money be our God? Sure. What about the materialistic things of life? What about our house? What about our livelihood? You know, that phrase, I got to keep up with the Joneses. I want the best thing of everything in this life. Can that become your God? Can your image become your God? Yes. And friends, the fact is, does God accept that? What about glorifying a man? What about bowing down to a physical human being? You know, there's a situation that was right here in Acts chapter 10. Remember in Cornelius? You know, Cornelius was seeing a vision, and he was told by God to go and send men to Joppa and get Peter, and then he's going to be brought back over there to him. And the next thing you see here is that as soon as Peter walks in the midst, right here in verse 25 and 26, watch what it says. As Peter was coming in, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshiped him. But Peter lifted him up, saying, "Stand up, I myself am also a man." Did Peter accept this worship from Cornelius? Did he say, "Kiss my ring"? Did he ever say, "Yes, you need to bow down. You need to look at me as an individual who is high and mighty and powerful than you"? Did he have that type of mentality? I mean, in all reality, the Catholics believe that Peter was the very first pope. And they even go down to even the nitty-gritty of it, and they say that the Pope is to be seen as God himself. No wonder every time that the Pope is ever in the midst of somebody's bowing down and kissing his ring. My friend, let me ask you something. You think about the Apostle Peter being the example for any other man, right? Did he accept worship? Absolutely not. How did he say it? "Stand up, I myself am also a man." My friends, here's the thing we got to think about. Even whenever you try to exalt Mary, Holy Mary, Mother of God. You hear that so much in the Catholic faith. And it's like they idolize Mary. And I even watched an episode just yesterday as I was preparing for this lesson. And they said that we don't actually worship Mary. But here's the thing. If you pray to her, if you bow yourself down to her in any aspect, if you are glorifying her along with God on the same basis, then my friends, understand this, you are worshiping Mary. And it's not acceptable to God. Should we ever worship an apostle or a simple man? No, never. Well, what about an angel or another created being? Is that even acceptable? You know, John was confronted by many angels in this whole revelation in the book of Revelation, but one particular time the angel revealed himself to him in Revelation 19 verse 10. It says, "And I fell at his feet to worship him, but he said to me, 'See that you do not do that.'" Now, he didn't just say it in a nice little cordial way, right? You see the exclamation point, right? He's saying this with force. He says, "I am your fellow servant and of your brethren who have the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy." Even an angel himself would not even receive worship. Why? Because it wasn't his place to be worshiped. Only the Creator is the one who can receive worship and not be derogatory or anything like that. But in every instance where you have anyone, if it's of God, whether you're talking about an apostle or whether you're talking about an angel, every single time they have refused worship. Why? Because they understood who it was that deserved the worship. It wasn't them. Who did he say right here in this text? Worship God. Anything else created that involves mankind, that involves the angels, that involves anything that is created, he says that's not even worth being able to worship. At the same time, what about idols and little carved images? Well, are they able to be worshiped? Well, you think. "You shall not make idols for yourselves, neither a carved image nor a sacred pillar shall you rear up for yourselves, nor shall you set up an engraved stone in your land to bow down to it, for I am the Lord your God." You know, whenever he makes that statement, "For I am the Lord your God," not only is he making a specific statement and showing his authority. But at the same time, I think it's very interesting to note that he's also saying, you need to understand my status. I am the Lord, your God. They're not little gods. I mean, there's other passages that we can easily go to. Besides me, there is no God, right? You can go to other passages that says that he is a jealous God, and the only reason why he says he's a jealous God is because he made us and he wants us to worship him, right? But yet we go and worship other things, and no wonder it stirs him to anger. But we need to understand the fact, my friends, that whenever we are talking about idols or carved images, God has never, ever accepted this. And I mean never accepted this. And so when we talk about that, what about God? What about God only? Is that what's acceptable? If you recall back over here in Matthew chapter 4, whenever Satan led him out into the wilderness to be tempted for 40 days. Now, I want you to notice what happened here. Then Jesus said to him, away with you, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only you shall serve. Now, if you remember what he actually tempted him with, he says, look, I want to take you to a really high mountain, and I'm going to show you all the kingdoms of the world. And you know what? If you just bow down and worship me, I will give you all of these kingdoms. And this is his response. You shall worship the Lord your God, and him only you shall serve. My friends, what was Jesus actually making as a statement, as a truth? That God only is the only one that can be worshiped and be received. Not ourselves, not the way we want to worship. Because here's a really, really good question as we start drawing this whole entire lesson in the last few minutes to a close. Can we worship God in any way? My friends, to answer this question, I want to answer it in this way. Can we throw anything up to God and expect God to catch it? Can we expect throughout any dispensation, has God always received anything and everything that God or that man has actually thrown up to God? You think about Genesis chapter 4. Did God receive Cain's worship? Did he receive Cain's sacrifice? No. So why do we think that if he didn't do it in the beginning, that all of a sudden everything's changed now? My friends, whenever you look at this one particular passage right here in John chapter 4, verse 24, it really shows everything that we need to know. Watch this. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. Now watch on the screen with me just for a second. In this, you have the subject. You have God being the subject of every single bit of this worship. At the same time, he says that God is spirit and those who worship him must. Now, what does that mean? This word must shows obligation. This shows that there is no ifs, ands, or buts. There is no alteration. There is nothing of that sort. At the same time, you also must worship him in spirit and in truth. You think about the word spirit. A lot of times it's been classified as attitude. Well, it goes a whole lot deeper than just attitude, because whenever he makes the statement, God is spirit, then he says that we must worship him in spirit. In other words, what he's basically saying is that our spirit, our demeanor, our attitude, our likeness, our actual spiritual being must connect with God's. How does that happen? By mirroring his image. At the same time, according to truth, according to his instructions. My friends, that is very, very vitally important whenever we think about that. Now, on the same time, I want you to also notice this. There is a word in spirit and in truth. That word "and" is what is known as a coordinating conjunction. Now, friends, I want you to notice this. As we think about the coordinating conjunction, that is a word that conjoins two or more things to show equal importance. We can't just have our spirit out here, friends, to just go ahead and just do whatever we want to do, that we can be excited about our worship and all of that. And here's the thing, friends. Is it possible for people throughout the world to go ahead and be worshiping? They have a lot of zeal and all that in their worship? Absolutely. But the fact of the matter is, friends, does truth have to be there as well? Yes. Is it good to have excitement? Is it good to have the mentality of where you're excited about being at worship? You know, every Lord's Day and every Wednesday, I am very excited to be around my brethren. I'm very excited to come together and study the Word of God together, and on Sundays to be able to worship together with them, to sing songs of praises and just be with my brethren, right? It's great. But if the truth's not there, will it be accepted by God? Yes or no? No. And the reason is because that word "and" is what conjoins the Spirit and the truth. They are of equal importance. Just as important as it is to have the zeal and the desire to worship God, to give Him what He desires and things like that, is as important as the instructions on how to go about the worship. Don't do anything more, don't do anything less than what is prescribed for Christians to do on the Lord's Day. My friends, if we don't combine the two, then friends, we're missing the mark. And God is not going to be accepting anything. You know, may we remember this as we start drawing this thing to a close. Psalm 96 and verse number 5 says, "For all the gods of the peoples are idols, but the Lord made the heavens." If we do anything else other than God, it's nothing more than an idol to us. And therefore, we must always remember that God only accepts worship, and He is the only one to receive the worship. Remember there in Matthew chapter 4, verse 10, "For it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and Him only you shall serve." To answer that question, as we have been evaluating this today, to whom is worship to be given? It's to God and to God only, my friends. And if anything is altered away from that, may we have enough courage and love for God to say, "I'm sorry," and change our ways, become His child, and worship Him, the true and living God. Give Him every single bit of the honor, praise, and everything that He deserves. So with that being the case, it's your choice. Will you do it?